Okay, so in the making of this particular tutorial, what we're going to be needing is all of this. So you need your tape rule or tape measure, you need your writing material, could be through marker, if it is on a pattern paper, you need your pattern master, you need your curves. So I have the armhole and the neck curve. You need a pair of scissors, but this is my tracing wheel. You need a tape, a straight ruler, fabric chalk, optional, and then this old soldier. Okay, so mine actually got broken, but it's fine. I kind of play around with it sometimes though. Straight lines are very important, more as well as the curvy lines. So let's get into it. And this is the fabric I'm going to be using. So this is a 100% cotton khaki material that I'm going to be making use of. So in some fabric stores you can see this for cheaper prices, and some could also be very costly. This is the 100% cotton, and that's why it's this costly. I got a yard of it for 7.5, and a trouser length is for 9,000. So let's go into the video. Okay, so this is going to be the measurement that we'll be working with for this cargo pant, and I really needed to explain this before we start. All right, so you'll not be getting confused with all my markings and the fabric and all those. All right, so we're going to be working with the waist of 27 inches, a hip of 37, a knee of 20. That's the circumference of the knee, right? 20 inches, and then the crotch depth of 10.75. And how did we arrive at that? We simply did hip divided by 4 plus 1.5. And also take this into consideration when you're making an actual waist cargo pant. You want to divide your hip by 4 plus 1.5. But if you're making a high waist and you really have going on around the back side, you want to divide your hip by 3 plus 1.5. all right, and that's going to give you your actual crotch depth or your crotch length. All right, moving away, for the front crotch curve or your front crotch extension, you want to divide your front crotch curve by 20. Okay, your front crotch curve following the arrow is divided by 20, and that's going to give you 1.85, which you have here. Approximately this is 2 inches, right? Approximate it as a one whole number, and this becomes 2. Okay, so now for the back crotch curve, all right, you're going to divide your hip by 10, and for this measurement it gave us 3.7. all right, 3.7. So now another thing you could also take note of is when you're marking on your fabric, of course when we get there you're going to understand better. So now for the full length of this particular cargo pant, we're going to be working with 38 inches, and then when you add 2 inches for your folding allowance, that's going to give you 40. all right, so now for the full length, the round full length, what we're going to do is simply mark our knee round measurement, which is, it could be 20 or 17 depending on how full you want it to be. So now if we're using 20 divided by 2 is going to give us 10. So you take the width of 20 inches divided by 2, and that's going to give you 10. When we start marking, you're going to see it. Then for your hip point, for this measurement we're making use of 9 inches. If the person is really tall, you can use 10 inches, but know that it starts from the range of 8 inches to 10 inches at most, or 10.5 depending on the height of the person. So now our knee point is going to be 23 inches, and if you don't want it to start exactly on your knee, you don't want the fullness to be too much on your knee area, you can come up with 2 or 3 inches from the 23. So you're going to mark it on 20. Some people come as well as 4 inches, so it could be 19, right? So that's all there is to this measurement for the cargo pant. So let's go into the practical now. Okay, let's go. So I folded my fabric into 2, and I pushed out 2 inches from my tape, and that was for my band. And I measured my full length, which was 40 inches, like we calculated. 38 inches plus 2 inches hemming allowance, and that made it 40. So this is me coming up back to my waist point and taking my length of the hip, which is 9 inches, and then I marked my crotch depth, all right, And then I went ahead to mark the knee point, which is optional at this moment because we're making a cargo pant, not a fitted pant, and it's not necessarily going to be fitted at the knee point, but I really needed to mark that line. So I went ahead to duplicate everything that I've marked here so I can have a straight horizontal line when I'm connecting those lines together. So I went ahead and I marked my waist, the hip point, the crotch point, the knee point, and on my full length. And you also want to take notes that if you divided your hip by three, you would want to also know that your waistband is inclusive. Else, you don't want your crotch to be too lapping, so you could also add that extra 1.5, right? So this was I was trying to connect my lines here to make sure that everything is straight. All right. So you want to go ahead and do the same thing, connect your points together and form an horizontal line. So this is the measurement that we're going to be taking now, and that is our front crotch curve. Remember, we divided our hip by 20. Whatsoever it gives you, you're going to go ahead and mark it on the waist point, the crotch point, and on the hip point. And mine gave me 2.3 inches. So I just marked 2.3 inches on my crotch point. I marked it on my hip point, as you can see me doing it now, and I also marked it on my waist point. Now, after doing that, you will go ahead and connect all those three lines or the 3 points together in a vertical line, and you must make sure that everything aligns before you connect. You don't want one part to be bigger than the other, so it should be 2.3 or whatever measurement you are having from all points together. So now we want to create the crotch curve, and I'll be coming up from my crotch point by 2 inches. This is to enable me create my front crotch curve, because some people just go ahead and measure their hip measurement before connecting. But here, what I do is I come up from the crotch point by 2 inches, and I went in with my crotch curve ruler, and I connected from my that 2 inches to my crotch curve. And if you pay attention to how I'm folding this cloth, my measurements start exactly on the folding end of my fabric. If you're making use of a pattern paper, you want to leave about 2 inches or 3 inches at most on your starting point before marking. That is, if you're making use of front and back together in one pattern paper. So now I want to take my horizontal measurement starting from that straight ruler that I marked, all right, or straight line rather, that I marked. So my waist divided by 4, that's what I'm marking there. And you're going to go ahead and add 1 inch for your sewing allowance. Remember, it's a cargo pant. You don't want it to be too tight or too big, all right? You want to keep everything at the average. So I was marking my hip divided by 4 here on the hip point, and I'll also add 1 inch sewing allowance. Now you can go ahead and duplicate the same thing on your crotch line, because I did it for my own, but it's optional. You must not do it, okay? If you don't want to duplicate the same thing, you can just go ahead from your hip line and you just connect your lines to your hem point or your full length. But here I duplicated what I had on my hip measurement on the crotch point or the crotch line. I marked my hip divided by 4 plus 1 inch, and I came in with my pattern master. So you can do this with your free hands if you don't have a pattern master, or you can also use a straight ruler to connect the lines. But be sure at the end of the day to take away all pointy arrows, pointy lines, so you can curve it and then it will be smooth. All right. So I was going ahead to cross check everything that I was doing to make sure it is accurate here. And still with my pattern master, I curved my hip from the hip point to the crotch point. And I want to use my straight ruler to connect it all the way to my full length. And that's what I was doing here. So on the full length, remember the 10 inches that we took? That's the 20 inches round knee measurement, or the 20 inches knee circumference divided by 2 is going to give you 10 inches. So
That's the 10 inches that I'm marking here now. Now, because I folded my fabric into two and I started all my basic measurement from the folded part, I didn't have any allowance. So I just placed the tape and marked the 10 inches. But then again, when I wanted to create the lines all the way to my full length, there is a problem here. And if you look closely, you're going to notice the mistake. I actually didn't place my pattern paper well because I was trying to concentrate on the straight part of the pattern master, so it actually made the line to shift from the other end which I connected from my hip point, and it was just being indifferent. So I figured out a way which I wanted to solve the issue or fix the problem. So I now came in with my tape rule after realizing that I'm still not getting this measurement to catch up with each other. So I came to the full length. I measured from the 10 inches. I added extra 2 inches to it and I marked. And the extra 2 inches that I added made that particular measurement to become 12 inches other than 10 inches. Now I did that because I wanted a straight line that can match up from my hip point or my waist point to the full length. I succeeded in connecting the straight line here, but watch the trick. After connecting the straight line, I figured out that the problem was not even with my measurement. The issue was with the placement of my pattern master. So I now decided to figure out a way on how to place it and everything will sit right. So I did. And at this point, when I placed my pattern master rightly, it actually landed me at my 10 inches, which I marked initially. So what I did was just to connect the lines again back from the knee point to my full length on the 10 inches that I had initially. So now making the 2 inches that I added to be void, but not actually void because I came up with a solution of how to make use of that 2 inches. So we're going to come back to that 2 inches extension on the full length, but now let's go back to our measurement. I want to do my waist slant now because you don't want your trouser to be puffy at the end of the day when you are done. You want everything to sit well balanced on your waist. So I came down by 1 inch and then on my crotch curve line, and then I connected with my pattern master from my side front, right? I connected it all the way to the 1 inch slope or slant line that I gave. So for your waist slant. And then I went back again to the 2 inches that I added on the full length. So now this was me trying to explain to you that if your pattern, if your fabric is on a folded end like this, you can still make use of that 2 inches that you added. But this time around, what you have to do is switch your tape to face the 2 inches and start measuring 10 inches from that tape row. Okay, from that point, you measure your 10 inches to this folded side of your fabric. When you're done with that, what you want to do is just place your pattern master. At this point, I was trying to see if it could be possible me using my curve ruler, but I was scared. I said I don't want to repeat the mistake that I did before. So I just placed my pattern master and then exactly the way I did it on the other side, I connected from the knee point to my full length. And when I was able to establish that line, I came in with my curve ruler to get my crotch curve. So I placed my curve ruler on my knee point down to my crotch curve. And when I was done with that, I just connected everything together to make sure it sits well. This was me trying to adjust my crotch curve because at this point, I was now being extra careful of my markings and the things that I was doing. Now, at the end of the day, I'm not going to be using this particular method or like the second line that I'm creating. All right. I'm going to be cutting it exactly on my initial lines. This is just to show you in case you want to maintain that extra 2 inches that I added before now in order to get my markings correct or straight. But if you don't want to maintain that 2 inches, you can as well avoid it after connecting to the initial 10 inches that we had. But if you want to maintain that 2 inches, so this is what you have to do. You have to mark from that 2 inches to the folded end and then connect. This is how you're going to get your pants to be fitted on the actual line, right? So away from that, I'm going to go ahead now and cut off everything that I have. I'm going to cut it on the lines that I had already marked, and then that would be it for the front piece. Okay, let's create our back block. All right. So this was me folding a fresh pattern paper or a fresh fabric and then introducing my front block on the back block. I left about 2 inches or 2.5 inches away from the, starting point or the beginning line, which is going to serve as my waistline in this case. And by the sides too, I also left about 2 to 3 inches, and then I went ahead to duplicate all my horizontal markings on the front. I had to do the same thing for the back block, and then that was me. I was marking my knee point, my full length, my waist point, my hip point, and the crotch point. Remember when we divided our hip by 10, we had our back crotch curve. Now, if you don't have a lot of buttocks at the back, you also want to take in some measurement for it not to be too wide. So now for me, I decided to reduce it by 1.7 inches. So instead of making use of 3.7 inches, I decided to make use of 2 inches because this person is actually on a small size. So this was me marking out the 2 inches starting from my waist point. I came out by 2 inches and I marked. I did the same thing on my hip point. I came out on my hip line by 2 inches and I marked, and also on my crotch curve point, I came out by 2 inches and I marked. Now you want to also take into consideration that if you have a lot of buttocks at the back, leave your crotch measurement the way it should be. If you had 3 inches, mark 3 inches. If you have four, mark four. So now I came in with my crotch, my pattern master, right? And then I connected my 2 inches from the hip point to the crotch point, and then using the straight part of my pattern master, I connected from my hip point down to the top part of my fabric or the starting point of my fabric, which is on the waist line now. So I use a straight line from the waist all the way to the hip point. And then after doing that, what you want to do is you're you're going to mark everything, like connect the straight line all the way up, right? So when I was done marking that, I came in with my measuring tape and I marked 2 inches upward. And this is for my back block slope or my back pant slope. Remember on the front bodies or the front block, we marked down 1 inch, but this time around on the back, we're marking up 2 inches. So I went ahead to take my front waist measurement, and what I had there was 8 inches, and I came to the straight line on my back block and I took 8 inches from that straight line to be my waist measurement. Now, remember that you've duplicated your hip measurement on the back block. You just want to connect from your hip measurement all the way to the 8 inches measurement on your back block, right? The 8 inches measurement is what we had for the front waist measurement. So we're duplicating the same thing at the back. All right. When you're done, you flip back your front block or your front pant, whichever way. So I now decided to confirm my 2 inches measurement, which I took, and I discovered that I added about extra half of an inch to it. So I just placed my tape and I corrected the line. So I wanted it to be 2 inches on the dot or in the exact. not adding extra inches to it. So after taking out the half inch, I reconfirmed from my waist point and it gave me 2 inches. So I just reestablished the lines, okay, to make it more visible. Now, when you're done taking your back block slope, I, I was just confirming everything here. Okay, so now I was just confirming my measurement. And when I was sure that everything was okay, I went ahead to, trace now on the front block all the way exactly on the back block to the end. Okay. And then on this other side of my pant, I'm going to come out on the knee point by 1.5 inches because I don't want this pant to be too big. I want it to be at the moderate. Okay. So I came out on my back block from the knee point by 1.5 inches, and on the hem point or the full length, I came out by 1 inch. And I'm going to connect that 1 inch on the full length to the 1.5 inches on the knee length or the knee point. And then from the knee point, I'm going to come in with my curve ruler and I'm going to connect my crotch curve that's on the back block all the way to my knee point. All right. When I'm done with that, now I followed the same 1.5 inches all the way to my crotch curve. You could decide to use a straight ruler if you want everything to align, but I needed to come in a little bit and then the differences would show on my knee point. Okay. So now I connected all the lines together from my crotch to the knee, from the knee to the full length. This was me trying to just straighten up the markings a bit on my crotch curve area. And when I was done doing that, I just want to go ahead and then cut it out.
Okay, now so let's draft the side pocket. You want to identify where your pocket is going to be. So I just went ahead to rule out my hip point, my crotch point, and that was all the lines, the horizontal lines that I needed for this my pocket. So now this is the front piece that I'm working on right now, and I'm using the wrong side of the fabric. So you can mark any width that you want your pocket to be. For me, I used 7 inches. Okay, so you can go as well as 8 inches, but you want to be mindful of the space between your crotch and your pocket. So I left mine at 7 inches. So I marked this line in between on my hip line, and then I took the length of 10 inches. So you can go as long as 13 inches at most, but I used 10 inches for mine. And I marked that 10 inches point, then connected it with the horizontal line that I marked, which was the 7 inches. Okay, and then after marking, look at the way my tape was placed. Your tape is supposed to be straight, okay, supposed to be on a straight line, but I placed mine on a slanty form and it really didn't give me what I needed. So yeah, at this point I was in a hurry, I wouldn't even lie. But I had to like make some necessary corrections. I started off with a pink fabric chalk, but when I made my correction, I now used my blue fabric chalk. So you could just see the differences. Now I'm supposed to place my ruler straight, not slanted form. So now I came in by 3 inches inwards. Okay, so you just want to take from your side front, you want to come in by 3 inches. So when I placed my tape and I noticed the 3 inches was not coming, I was just like, what is the problem? So I had to go back, cross check my measurement, confirm everything, rechalk using blue marker this time. Okay, so I placed my tape from the waist point of my trouser and I came down by 7.5 inches, and this is for my pocket opening. So if you want your pocket to be a fancy pocket, you can avoid this because you're going to stitch all the way around. But if you needed to have a space where you can put your hand, you just want to come down with 7 inches or 7.5 inches and then create an horizontal line at that point. So now I came in by 1.5 inches from the side, and this is for my pocket slant.